George Zimmerman is at the center of one of the most polarizing cases in recent memory. He's accused of killing an unarmed teen, Trayvon Martin, but he says it was in self-defense after he was attacked. Do you believe him? Should he have been armed to begin with on that night? And will he be found guilty or innocent? We'll talk about this divisive case right now on It's Your Call. Hello, everyone. It's good to have you with us as we debate a case that has divided this country since the moment it happened. I'm Lynn Doyle, asking you to weigh in on the Trayvon Martin case. You'll recall that he's the Florida teen that was shot to death in a gated condominium community by a self-proclaimed neighborhood watch captain. At first, police found no reason to arrest George Zimmerman, but after local protest quickly grabbed the national stage, he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. But was that the appropriate action or one spurred by public debate? That's just one of the questions that we'll try to answer this hour. Now, I'm sure that you have an opinion on that and lots more surrounding this case, like, do you think it was self-defense when George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin? Or was he a vigilante gone rogue that night? Is it fair that he's on trial for murder? Or was he the one under attack, as he says? If you want to join in, you can start emailing me right now at lynn@lynndoyle.net. As always, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. We are at It's Your Call Show. I want to begin with our longtime It's Your Call legal analyst, defense attorney Jeffrey Evan Gold, who is also a former assistant prosecutor. Jeff, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Lynn.
There are a lot of viewers who are wondering why this case is even going to trial since police didn't arrest George Zimmerman for over a month after the incident. When did it evolve into a murder case?
Well, it got some national attention on some networks that pushed it, and then he did get charged. There are really two facts in the case that are opposing. One, everyone knows that he was told not to follow Trayvon Martin and then went ahead and did. On the other hand, the autopsy shows that at the time that the gun was shot, Trayvon Martin was on top of George Zimmerman. So there are some facts on both sides of it. Whether George Zimmerman can get a fair trial when everyone seems to be coming in with their mindset about whether this is a racial case, a political case. After all, the President of the United States weighed in on this local case to say he could have been his son. So there's all kinds of drama going on in Florida today.
We're going to talk about all of those things, but first I do want to understand why the prosecution is seeking a guilty verdict for a second-degree murder, but not premeditated murder. If you knew that he was there, if you knew he was in the presence of this so-called victim, why not charge him with first-degree murder?
Well, I think they recognize he didn't go into this struggle with the idea that he would kill him. And he probably didn't know more than this was a heat of passion circumstance. So second degree recognizes the fact that there was a struggle, that perhaps it was motivated by some provocation. Heat of passion is generally considered an imperfect self-defense. So it's more than self-defense, enough to convict you, but it's not that you premeditated it, not that you thought about it ahead of time.
Okay, originally we heard a lot about the so-called stand your ground. Right. Defense and legislation, which is in effect in Florida and many other states across the nation. So why is George Zimmerman's defense attorney moving away from it, and perhaps explain what it is for us?
Well, first of all, the overall concept that at least 21 states have adopted now is you don't have to retreat. Let's say it in simple terms. The stand your ground was a procedure that in Florida that allowed you to do this pretrial, that allowed you to come forward pretrial, have a hearing, and the judge could, in essence, dismiss the charges. You couldn't be sued, case over. Mm-hmm. His attorneys decided they didn't want to have this hearing twice. It may have been for money reasons. They didn't want to put the experts up twice, or for tactical reasons. They didn't want their witnesses exposed to cross-examination and then have that testimony be used later at a trial. The attorney wanted to have it all in one at trial. The judge denied it and said either it's stand your ground or self-defense. Okay. But the key is there's still no duty to retreat.
Okay, on that note, we're going to invite our viewers to be part of the conversation. Let's start with that stand your ground law. Do you think that those kinds of laws should be in effect in Florida and 21 other states, or do you think that's just a recipe for trouble? You can go ahead and email me your thoughts on that. Now, as you know, Trayvon Martin was black. He was also 17. He was unarmed, although the defendant says that he didn't know that at the time. Do you think race is playing a role in this case? I'm going to put that question first this hour to Chad Lassiter, who's president Black Men at Penn University. Black men at Penn, University of Penn School of Social Policy and Practice. It's nice to have you back with us.
Nice to be here, Lynn. Thank you for having me.
This is one of those questions that everyone has an opinion on. Would this case have gotten the local, national, and constant attention that it's gotten if it didn't involve an unarmed black man?
I agree with the sentiments that Jeffrey articulated in the sense that the media pushed the paradigm. They pushed the paradigm because it becomes a sexy topic along the color line. What you have is a racialized episode with a white male attacking an African-American male and eventually killing an African-American male. And I think people became alarmed because of that. I think one of the things I would like to look at is the mere aspect of if you had a white male who was told not to pursue him, to get out and to pursue him, buying into the racial imagery that some white males display with, this whole notion that Trayvon Martin had on a hoodie, things of that nature, is really insignificant. It buys into that racial imagery. And so I think one of the challenges that we have is that we have a lot of individuals that want to maintain status quo and not buy into the larger racial narrative that's really polarized. And so the president had every right, just like many of us had every right, to really push the narrative to simply say, this is a young man, if he was my son, would look something similar to me.
I should point out, though, that George Zimmerman is not a Caucasian male. He is of Hispanic descent.
Given the context of the American structure, a lot of people did not pick that up. So most people, when they look at George Zimmerman, they don't look at George Zimmerman as a Hispanic male. They look at George Zimmerman as a white male, and that comes with a certain degree of privilege as well.
Do you think in this day and age, though, we should stop looking at people and the color of their skin and rather say what were the circumstances surrounding the incident?
The reality is we don't. The reality is we don't. And what we also know is that a white male wouldn't have gotten shot by another white male in that instance, being in the gated community with a bag of Skittles, with a hoodie on, raining with his iPad. And so people.
We know that? We know that if it was one white man
we don't see that in American
threatened
society.
by another, that he might not do the same thing?
We don't see that in American society. What we see is this carnage along color lines. And I'm almost certain that when we look at various cases throughout the country, it's almost similar to what happened with Emmett Till. And that's why you saw a lot of people galvanizing. We do not see that on the other side of the color line. And so black lives are worth something, and we have to look at black humanity in the same way that we look at white humanity.
All right, as you can see, a lot of very emotional subjects here. Gun control, racial issues. Perhaps that's why this case has been so polarizing and also so mesmerizing, why we're watching it so closely. If you want to tell us what you think, you can join in now by emailing me at lynn@lynndoyle.net. I want to bring the rest of our panel in, which includes Shira Goodman, who is the executive director of Ceasefire Pennsylvania. That's a coalition of individual Pennsylvanians, state leaders, mayors, police chiefs, communities, organizations. They take a stand against gun violence in Pennsylvania. And Bob Costeras is the owner of Classic Pistol Gun Shop and Range in Southampton, Pennsylvania. He is an endowment level member of the NRA. Shira, Bob, thank you for returning to the show. I want to start with you because I was kind of watching you out of my peripheral vision when you were listening to Jeff describe the situation and then Chad make his comments. Where do you stand on this particular case?
I agree with Chad. I really feel that from the facts I've read, or what I've read, now I don't even know if they're facts at this point, that this person profiled, he saw somebody in a hoodie. The person wearing the hoodie, Trayon Martin, sees a guy following him, 17 years old. He's going to the convenience store, going back to watch the rest of the basketball finals. He sees a strange person following him. He runs. He evades. He tries to get away. I don't see that as a problem. He comes back. The gentleman gets out of the car. Now Trayvon Martin's going to fight. He doesn't know what's going on. He's going to stand his ground. He's going to fight and defend himself. And I think from what I've read, that might have been what happened.
So you're actually seeing Trayvon Martin as the one who was standing his ground instead of George Zimmerman.
Yes.
And yet here you are a member of the NRA. People would be expecting you to say George Zimmerman had every right to have that gun and be in that situation.
He had every right to have a gun. He was told by the police dispatcher, from what I've read, to stay in the vehicle. He chose not to. He chose to pursue. These were decisions that he made for whatever reason, I don't know. Would I have done that? No. I would have stayed in the vehicle. He was on the neighborhood watch. I read that he was looking to see what street he was near. Well, there's 260 houses in a gated community. He should have known what street it was. I don't buy that.
Okay, Shira, this is a case that screams out to gun control advocates. This is why you don't put a gun in the hands of somebody like George Zimmerman, that he shouldn't have been armed to begin with. Do you buy into that philosophy?
Well, Our concern is, how did he get the gun? Why did he have it? If he doesn't have a criminal background, if he hasn't had something in his mental history that would preclude him from having a gun, then he has a right to have a gun. If he had a right to be carrying concealed, Florida standards are different than Pennsylvania standards, and that's why it was so important when Attorney General Kathleen Kane recently closed the Florida loophole and said if you're going to carry a concealed gun in Pennsylvania as a Pennsylvania resident, you're going to have to meet our standards, not Florida standards. So that's the question. Did
So you're not
meet all those
against him
standards?
having a gun if he met all of the qualifications.
But, stand your ground. We opposed that when they tried to expand this in Pennsylvania in 2009. It was eventually expanded in 2011 because we believed it was unnecessary because traditional laws of self-defense protected people. Prosecutors, police said, we don't need this expansion. You didn't have a duty to retreat in your home. You did have a duty, if you could safely retreat, to try and do that elsewhere. And if you still needed to resort to deadly force because your life was in imminent danger, you had that right.
Okay.
We've expanded that to now say your calculus is different. You don't have to see if you can safely get away now. You can shoot first, and that's a problem.
We're going to ask our viewers what they think about that, but I have to take a quick break. Do you support the stand your ground law? Should you be able to defend yourself in your own home, your own car, or in George Zimmerman's case, your own neighborhood? Tell us what you think during the break. We're going to read your comments. You can also find me on Facebook at Lynn Doyle or Lynn, it's your call, Doyle. We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Call. Wow, we ask your opinion about the Trayvon Martin case and the fate of the man charged with his murder, George Zimmerman, and what a response we have gotten. Let's take a look at some of the Facebook postings that this inquiry prompted. Daniel says he is absolutely innocent. No way was it second-degree murder. Mark says he can't get a fair trial anywhere in this country, especially with evidence being suppressed, such as Martin's marijuana usage. That's something that just came out, but the court said doesn't make any difference in this situation. Art says, I'm pro-gun, but he should have let the police handle it. He was told not to approach, and he did. I think he provoked it. All right, this is just an example of how divisive this case is, but a lot of people saying he definitely made the wrong decision getting out of that car.
Look, it's super divisive. We have people making opinions right now, and I'm trying to withhold my opinion, although I had the same knee-jerk reaction when you first heard it, that it was all one way. What we do know two things. One, George Zimmerman really didn't stand his ground because he moved from his ground. And the other thing we don't know is whether Trayvon Martin simply attacked him. We just don't know that if he started to pummel him or whatever else. We don't know that. So that's why there's a trial, and that's why everybody ought to just hold their breath, let the evidence come in.
I think it's inconceivable to hold your breath when a young African-American male got shot, and if it had been any other male, I would still be saying the same thing. A life was lost here, and so I can't then pause. I think what we need to do...
We just don't know.
Well, there are some things we do know. We do know that, George Zimmerman has a repeated history of being a vigilante rogue. We also know that he was told not to get out the car.
Why do you say vigilante as opposed to being a neighborhood watch?
He was not a neighborhood watch.
I'm playing devil's advocate, but we don't know that he was a vigilante.
I'm not going to play devil's advocate. What I'm going to do is give you the facts. What I'm going to do is give you the facts. I'm not talking about the media. What we have is we have data that really states that this was an individual who on several occasions had run-ins when the police officers and that department and that township told him, we don't need you to do anything, Mr. Zimmerman. We have this. Look, so those transcripts
I grant
are real.
You, he called 911 46 times.
That's problematic.
Okay, I agree with that.
Perhaps that's where vigilante comes in. Perhaps that's why Chad uses that
word. Or maybe a
biopsychosocial
biopsychosocial assessment because he has some mental health issues.
No, we understand vigilante. We don't get that.
If you're in a neighborhood watch, maybe that's what you're supposed to do. What he did wrong here was he didn't listen to what the advice from 911 was. Well, calling them is not wrong.
I think that what's heartening is to listen to the comments of some of your people who've written in, to listen to Bob, to see even what legislators in Pennsylvania for expansion of the Castle Doctrine said when they read this case. This isn't what we were talking about when we were talking about the Castle Doctrine. George Zimmerman didn't listen to the police. He wasn't standing his ground. He moved from his ground. That's not what we were talking about. And so the fact that people on both sides of that debate can at least recognize that and say, we want something different in Pennsylvania. That's not the kind of case we're intending to see. I think that's encouraging.
Does it concern you that it may prompt changes in stand your ground laws?
It's not going to prompt
It's not going to prompt a change?
I don't believe this is going to do that at all. What bothers me is they bring up the fact that he had some marijuana use. I'm not a drug user, but a lot of people out there are, and occasional marijuana use is going to make somebody label them as a criminal. Well, it's illegal, but it doesn't make him an evil person, a killer, somebody that should be attacked walking back to his fellow fiance's condo. I just have a hard time with this. Yes, you should be able to stand your ground. You shouldn't have to run in your home. But my opinion is, I'm never going to be the one that pursues the incident. I will defend myself and my family. I definitely will.
And under what parameters would you say defending yourself and your family would include? If someone has a gun on you, trains a gun on you, or attempts to shoot at you and your family, then do you pull the trigger?
Oh, without a doubt. But I want to, before I stand my ground, somebody's going to be in serious threat of serious bodily harm or death, rape, where I'm sure if I don't act, or I feel positive that if I don't act, something very bad is going to happen. At that point, I will act and I will take my chances in the legal system.
You know, right, and at that point, George Zimmerman could have driven away.
Yes.
He could have safely driven away, as far as we know. So we, like Jeff said, we don't know what happened after that, when they actually started that confrontation, but we know he had that opportunity. The law didn't require him to do that anymore, and that's a problem.
And what was Trayvon Martin doing? He wasn't doing anything. So getting into the psyche of George Zimmerman, what was it that was running through George Zimmerman's mind? Here's a young man coming back, has a hoodie on. He profiled. That's what he did. He racially profiled this young man, and it was demarcated by space that you're not supposed to be in this gated community. And therefore, what he did was he engaged in the racial profile. He brought into it. And that's why we got that situation. And so certainly a 17-year-old all across America, if someone was chasing them or someone was following them, would probably be, disturbed by it, and would also be kind of confrontational.
Well, you just never know, really, until you're in that situation. That's what our viewers are telling us, is that it's just such an emotional situation that some people might retreat and others might turn around and confront. I guess it depends on the kind of person that you consider yourself to be.
I don't think Trayvon Martin was retreating at that point. I think he was fearing for his own safety. He's got a crazy person. He doesn't know who it is in the car behind him.
And he has every right to turn around and say, hey, why are you following me?
The guy gets out. He says he got out, from what I read, to get a street sign to find out what location he was in. It was a 260-home gated community. He's the neighborhood watch captain. He doesn't know the street names.
Who everyone did not want to be the neighborhood watch guy on several occasions. The neighbors reported that, oftentimes it was one of those things where they was just like, this guy is he's out of control.
All right, on that note, I'm going to check back in with our Facebook postings and find out what you think about this. I've asked the question whether or not George Zimmerman would be able to get a fair trial, because obviously ever since this happened, people have been talking about it. So Steve has written in and says, sadly, there's no way he can get a fair trial. The pre-trial publicity has been far too extensive. Natalie says, well, as a town watch, he wasn't supposed to have a gun, let alone approach. He's supposed to call the police. The kid was just walking home and his life is gone, tearing his family apart. She thinks that George Zimmerman is guilty of murder. Now, Mary says, if I was doing town watch alone in a crime-ridden area at night, I would definitely be carrying. She thinks George Zimmerman is innocent. We want to give you the opportunity to tell us what you think, so if you'd like to email me, you can do it at lynn@lynndoyle.net. If you have questions or comments for our panelists, I always forward those along, and they're very gracious in responding to it. One of the biggest responses that we got didn't deal with the stand your ground aspect of this case, which I thought it would, because anytime you mention guns, people go, a little enthusiastic in their responses, but it was actually the racial component that has generated more response than anything else. Is there a message that we can, or a lesson that we can learn from this?
Well, one of the things, there are multiple lessons that we can learn. One of the most emergent lessons that I think we can learn is not to racially profile anyone, whether we are racially profiling George Zimmerman, because there's a whole notion around George Zimmerman that he was hell-bent on killing this African American youth. We don't know that. What we also need to make sure that we do is that we lend pause when we see black and brown males in our communities. We shouldn't necessarily imagine them not being in those particular communities. And I think one of the things that we can do is be more tolerant of each other. I think that there's too much intolerance that occurs, and that we buy into the narrative that oftentimes is showing people as being other. So there's a lot of xenophobic behavior that happens in these communities. To the person that remarked that, Maria, who stated that, if she was doing town watch in a crime-riddled neighborhood, this wasn't a crime-riddled neighborhood. So that's first and foremost that we have to provide some clarity on that.
That would make me ask the next question, is it okay to profile in a neighborhood that calls for it? But I'd have to do that on the other side of the break. You can weigh in though and tell us what you think about that, and I'll pose that question to the panel when we return. All right, guys, we're going to get right back into this discussion because it continued through the break. I'm sure it continued where you are as well. If you want to tell us what you think, go ahead and email me right away at lynn@lynndoyle.net. We're going to check in with some of the responses that we've gotten. Steve has said, I am armed 24/7 and have been for decades. I've also been trained on how to use the weapon I carry, and I practice regularly to maintain my skills. If I knew everyone else was equally prepared, I would feel a lot safer. Chuck writes, I would feel much safer. I had been in environments like that in the past, and I felt very safe when I was carrying my weapon. Patty says she wouldn't feel safer and thinks that it's sad that someone feels that they need to be armed 24/7. That's just some of the comments that we've gotten. Right before the break, though, we kind of posed the question, is it okay to profile in a certain situation if the neighborhood warrants it? Chad, you made the point that, you know, it's been said Trayvon looked like he was out of place in the gated community. If he looked like he was in place in a certain place, would profiling work there?
Profiling is not good at any time for me. I don't care if you're in a gated community, whatever catchment area you're in, we should not profile people because of gender or because of race.
Yeah, profiling's okay. It's just not because of race. That's true. I agree with that 100%. But I am worried about what's going to happen because of all the racial implications of this if George Zimmerman was acquitted.
And looking at the case beforehand, how long do you anticipate that it might take?
I don't know. They had a list of 300 witnesses. I doubt they're going to call 300 witnesses, so we just don't know. Today was a motion that could delay the trial, so we don't even know. They're still talking about the tape and discovery violations, so it could even be delayed. I don't think that's going to be the case. It's ready for trial.
But I also think that this whole notion of whether or not it was race that promoted this or whether it's the evidence, I think it's the silence that led to the pushing of this. Because right after the killing, George Zimmerman wasn't brought in for any questioning.
Well, but his father was a magistrate, and it's hard to say whether it was racial or because his father was a magistrate, a former magistrate. There are a lot of factors at play that may have had nothing to do with race.
But there still should have been some investigation, should have been some questioning without the racial narrative because a young person got killed or an individual got murdered. And so to have George Zimmerman walk away and nobody say anything was really troubling.
I think you're right about that.
I think that's part of the problem with those laws. It's an immediate defense. It can lead to no charges. Do the investigation. If it's found to be justified and not worthy of charging, I think that you could have avoided some of this, or maybe they would have charged earlier. But it shouldn't just be kind of, in a case like that where you only have one person talking and there's only two people who knew what happened, there's got to be some kind of investigation. It can't just be taking that person's word for it.
And to Bob's point, does it matter if you have marijuana in your system, if you got 2100 on your SATs, if you're on your way to Dartmouth, or if you're just a young person that just loves to go bowling on a Friday night? So all those other things really don't take into account. Same thing with George Zimmerman. Doesn't matter if he has good credit or bad credit. He was told not to leave the vehicle, and he did.
But do you think that people will be open-minded if the evidence comes out that perhaps Trayvon attacked him first? Maybe he shouldn't have been following him, but are we going to be open to the idea that it wasn't calculated murder?
That's what jury selection is about, and that's the first part of the case is can they find a jury that can say they will be impartial? If they say they never heard about the case, I'm worried about them, right?
Right.
I never heard of OJ. What?
Yeah.
Well, but if they say they can be fair and impartial, let's give them a shot at it.
All right.
I
Well,
have
we
a
are
lot of
gonna-
faith in the jury system as well, and I think when people get in that box, they really have an obligation, and they look at the evidence and they work together to get a verdict.
All right, well, we have all worked together here to bring our audience a wonderful discussion. I'm sure we're going to talk about this case many more times as the summer progresses, but thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for being with us as well. If you were unable to get through, email us at lynn@lynndoyle.net. Till the next time, have a good one.